because it looks like it's boiling with all the CO2 off-gassing. So as it boils, it cooks. It's cooking whatever's in there. So just be aware of it. And because it does create heat, the larger the vessel, the more you have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And for every, degree of bricks that you drop, you increase by 2 degrees of temperature. So it's, you have a 20 or a 25 bricks drop, you've just created a 50 degree temperature increase, and you've got a delta H of 50 degrees to the positive. So, as the barrel of your vessel gets larger and larger, you have to apply, a better environmental control. In order, the larger the vessel it is, you have to have more cooling available to keep it down into the fermentation range that you want. It's just little things like that. And developing flavors, I think going out and tasting a bunch of stuff. I had a blind spot in my head for African violets. I always smelled, African violets. It was my grandmother's favorite flower. And, I'd gone to the Home Depot. It's one of my favorite places, that and Lowe's, to walk through and just smell the different flowers out there, because a lot of times, if you've never smelled a hyacinth, or if you've never smelled a bluebell or an African violet or something else, what I do is I just sneak over to the home and garden section and walk out there and pluck little petals off of their flowers and roll them up in my hand and smell them. And sometimes I even have like a little pad with me, and I'll write down, it reminds me of this. And what's this rose smell like? And what's that rose smell like? And what's that daffodil smell like? And, what's that little iris over there smell like? And that snapdragon and all that. And, so somewhere there's a Home Depot in the Orange County area that has a bunch of little flowers that are missing a petal or two. Do that. You go into a restaurant, and there's all kinds of things. There's like, smell the pepper in there. What's the pepper there smell like? I can guarantee you, if you have peppercorns at home, it's going to smell different than what you smell in the restaurant, because that stuff's been sitting out in the air, and it's lost most of its aroma and most of its zing. But if you have like a bunch of organic telecherry, or a couple of the other kind of peppercorns that I've got around the house here, I don't remember them off the top of my head name-wise, but a couple of different kinds of black pepper and some green peppercorns as well. Szechuan, smell them, smell the difference. Some of them are more earthy and pungent. Some of them are more spicy and aromatic. And just getting an idea, black pepper, white pepper, pink pepper, green peppercorns, peppers themselves, fresh versus dry versus cooked, I mentioned ancho chili earlier. I think it's a wonderful pepper. There's virtually no heat to it, and it's an amazing flavor enhancer for a number of different things. And that's one of the things that I'm playing around with now, is just a couple of different chilies that are not hot, but they just add some real depth and complexity. So I think going out and trying different things and kind of relating those to honey, write down, like I said, keep a little pad and write in the categories of the different flavors that you think they are. If you can buy a flavor wheel, do that. There's a honey flavor wheel that Amina Harris sells up at UC Davis. I think for $10 it's real well worth it. You can sit down and you can go, wow, yeah, that tastes kind of like pine resin, or wow, that tastes kind of like, wood, or that tastes kind of like, what I imagine sherry or port might taste like. And then you can go over to that kind of flavor, and like, as you work further and further out from the center, it gives you more and more information. about what kind of group that would be in, or what kind of flavors or aromas fall into that group, and so on and so forth. But it's a really good way to kind of dial in, literally, your acumen on aromas and flavors. Try different foods. A lot of people just get the same thing at the same time. I'm all over the map with different things. Different syrups, and I love my maple syrup when I can get my hands on it. And the imitation maple flavor that they have in oatmeal, oh my God, I can't get within 10 feet of that stuff or it gives me a headache.
It also clings to your tongue for 3 hours later.
Yeah, it's crazy. To me, It smells like, I don't know how many of you were around for the, carpets in the 60s and 70s, but in the 60s, the carpet padding underneath it looked like this just mass of hair, flattened hair.
Yeah.
And when it got wet, it smelled horrific. And that imitation maple flavor is exactly how that wet carpet padding smelled.
Oh.
And it just gives me a headache.
Do you remember Space Food Sticks?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
That's kind of what I was thinking of when you were talking about that.
Okay. The other question we had was from Chris Hodge, and he asked this a while back in the show too, but he says, do you use pecans, and if so, how do you process them for a mead?
I do use pecans. I like to roast them or smoke them. And by roasting, I don't mean putting them in an oven and roasting them. I mean putting them into a cast iron skillet and getting the skillet up to temperature, but I don't look to turn them into like these little brown bombs. I just want to heat them up so that you're liberating the aroma and the flavor in there, and then I give them a coarse chop, and in they'll go. I do it differently for different things. Sometimes I will go ahead and roast them, or on the stovetop, in the cast iron skillet, a bunch of them, and then I'll take them and I'll put them into like a honey and water mixture into a crock pot and let them sit overnight on low to infuse that, and then I'll use the fluid from that to go into the fermenter or the secondary, sometimes the primary, depending on what I'm making. You can go ahead and coat them with all kinds of cool things, use a little bit of slightly thinned out honey to dredge them around in, and sprinkle them with cacao powder or cinnamon or spices, chili powder, whatever you want, and roast them like that as well, and then crush them up and put them into your vessel, or again create a tea out of them, with a crock pot overnight, and just take the liquid that's derived from that and pour that in to adjust flavor what you want. I do that with nuts. I do that with yams or sweet potatoes or pumpkins or virtually anything. With cooking pumpkin, I'll go ahead and quarter them up and slice into the meat and rub those down with some molasses and brown sugar and some, allspice, and brown them, and then scrape out the meat and put that into, the fermenter. Just depending, I think people overlook that cooking to me is an integral part of mead making. Not so much with wine making or with beer making, it would be the same. You do the same things basically. So right now I've got this thing for roasting almonds with cacao powder on them with a little bit of honey coating to make the powder stick so that you can roast them. And those, when I'm doing it like that, I actually do put those on a baking sheet in the oven on some parchment paper and let the dry heat just go in there and fuse it to the almonds.
That sounds so good. Sitting here wiping drool off my microphone.
I had a mead that Carvin brought to the Orpheus Cup. I believe it was made from, I know they're in a suburb of Georgia. I think it's called the Viking Alchemist. And it was
They're pretty good. I've had their mead.
there was a pecan nut and pears, and oh my God, it was just so fabulous. It was just.
Oh yeah, that's a great combination.
Oh my, it was so good. It was amazing.
About how much do you use per gallon for pecans?
What's that?
How much do you use per gallon when you're doing something with pecans?
I don't really go by gallon. I take, if I've got a big batch and I want a heavy influence in there, I'll make a crock pot full of that honey and roasted pecan tea and strain it out and add it in. If it's not enough, I'll go and make another one and add as much of it in as I need to get the flavor right. But I don't really go by gallons or anything like that. I go more by flavor when I'm doing those kind of additions because it's going to be different with each batch or each kind of honey.
Okay,
so, Pete, are you saying you take the nuts and put them in with honey and then cook it?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. In a slow cooker? A crock pot? Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting.
On low, yeah.
And then certainly it makes some oil on the top, correct?
Yep. But I'm adding it generally during either after the ferment or at the beginning of the end of the ferment. So.
And so you just rack until the oil drops down to where you're racking and then give up at that point?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right, I see. Wow.
Or a lot of times, if it looks like it's a lot of oil, I'll go ahead and take a couple of the unbleached coffee filters, and then, of course, you wet those with some distilled water to get the flavor of the filter out before you pour anything through it.
Mm-hmm.
Just pour through that and let it go through that, and that helps cut out most of the oils that's in there as well.
I see. I've often wondered in Ken Schramm's book, there's data galore about all the different honey varietals, and I look at that and I think there's got to be information with all of this data that's produced in these logs here about the different honey that we can use, and yet I'm not educated enough and experienced in mead making to see what those are telling us. Are there things in there that we can look at about a particular honey and help us to understand better how that might work in a fermentation? Yeah, the best and most comprehensive honey breakdown that I've seen is technical article 1268 by John White et al. There's a number of other people that worked with him on it, called The Composition of American Honey. And that's actually posted up in the Mead Makers group on Facebook.
It's on Got Mead too.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the Got Mead group. So, yeah, it's a good treatise. It's pretty dense, but it's good.
Yep.
And quickly, can you tell us what we might want to look at in that to?
Well, yeah, there's a grid that breaks down a number of different honeys as to the levels of fructose and glucose and ash and nitrogen and other compounds that are in the honey itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you've got a high fructose honey and you want to do a sweet mead and you want to leave a lot of that fructose in there, you want to get a yeast that's going to not be a real big eater of fructose but a big eater of glucose. So, you want to go down on the side of the scale there. 7-1B is your choice because it's not a big fructose, so it's not a big fructophil.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely glucophilic, so you'll leave a higher incidence of fructose in that mead than you will glucose. It's preferential, an obligate, preferential to glucose.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, sure.
It is really interesting. We have gone way long. We're coming up on 3 hours now.
Oops. Yeah, my dog is telling me, hey, You ain't fed me yet, you bastard.
Yeah. Mine are over here putting their paws on me going, dude, really?
Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet?
Pretty much.